recording this, so we'll send it out to family members and others that are interested after the event. So without further ado, I'm delighted to bring to you the program of today that is on time to reset, being able to keep care person-centered, not task-driven. Sometimes when you are a caregiver for a loved one, you get so caught up in the weeds of taking care of the task at hand that you are forgetting that it's actually a person that you are caring for. And you start to feel like it's just an uphill battle every single day. So Eric Collett, our presenter today, who's also the president of A Mind for All Seasons, our medical partner over here at the summit in our enhanced protocol, is going to give us some tips and some insight on how to be able to keep the care when we are working with our loved ones more at the center of the person and not so much the task. So without further ado, I'll do a little introduction for Eric. Eric Collett is the principal at A Mind for All Seasons. He is a nationally recognized speaker, consultant, and dementia expert, a licensed residential care administrator, and a teacher at Boise State University and the College of Western Idaho. Eric passionately believes that lifelong learning is the key to finding powerful new solutions to significant challenges and has been working to change lives through innovative dementia care techniques, program development, and leadership strategies since 2000. As part of the summit, being able to rely on this expert has been so valuable, not only for the training with our staff, but being able for our care, for Robeson and I, as we are doing the enhanced protocol. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Eric. Hi, Eric.
Hi, great to be with all of you. I'm going to share a few things about my personal experiences in the healthcare industry because they really tie into our topic today and they help illustrate some things. And I hope you'll forgive that little bit of indulgence, but I think it will help us understand our topic just a little bit better. And it's great to be with you. I appreciate you taking a little bit of time out of your day to learn some of these things. Really, what we're going to talk about, I think, is related to the biggest problem in healthcare. Whether you're a family or a professional care partner, the kinds of things that we'll discuss today drive so many of the problems that we face and the challenges that we really want to try to overcome. So initially, I went to college to become a reconstructive plastic surgeon, mainly because I had a neighbor who did that. And sorry, I'm hearing other discussion. Maybe there's something going on I'm not aware of.
No, Eric, I'm just trying to make sure I do the.
Okay, now I lost you on your mic. So, okay, I'm just going to keep going forward. So I went to college originally to become reconstructive plastic surgeon. And I didn't realize till I got involved in a pre-med program and started thinking a little bit more about a life in medicine that it was everybody else that wanted me to become a surgeon. It wasn't exactly what I wanted. And I was actually a piano and saxophone performance major because pre-med is not a major. And one of my surgeon mentors growing up said, hey, why don't you become a music major so that you can stand out from all the biology guys? And I had no idea how ridiculously difficult it would be to be a double music performance major on two different instruments and also do some pre-med work. So once I got my feet under me and realized it was everybody else that wanted me to become a surgeon, and it wasn't what I wanted, I got serious in saying, well, what do I really want to study? And the answer was, I enjoy people. I want to study people. I'm fascinated by what makes them tick and how they work and how to interact better. And so I got a degree in interpersonal and group communication with the intent of helping companies through culture change and mergers and acquisitions. And that meant that I had to get basically some experience in a management position before I could step out and begin doing a little bit of consulting. Well, I interviewed all over the place, and I ended up finding a job at an assisted living community as a program director, teaching educational programs to seniors. And I thought, wow, this is something I can do for 6 months while I keep interviewing for the perfect job. And then I got involved and I realized, I've actually been interested in seniors and what makes them tick my whole life. I wrote a paper in high school on possible causes of Alzheimer's disease. And so I'd been interested in dementia as well. And I thought, this is actually a really interesting laboratory. I can take everything that I learned in the communication field and apply it in this setting and try to figure some things out. And so pretty soon I was hooked, and I became an administrator and ended up working with that company for 9 years, and then worked with a different company for 7 years running a memory care only community. And along the way, I had a bunch of different aha moments and some awakenings where I realized things that I didn't exactly realize going into it. So last bit of preface with this is understanding what the communication field actually studies. Everybody knows about psychology, and most people kind of understand that psychology sort of gets inside the head. And I actually have a minor in psychology. Psychology tries to figure out, hey, what life experiences have fed into why you think the way that you do. But the communication field studies observable patterns of behavior and tries to shift those patterns in helpful ways. And by studying those observable patterns of behavior in the residents that I was serving in assisted living and memory care settings, I started seeing some things in the patterns of how people treated them and how I treated them and how they treated each other that kind of opened my mind to some things that were going on. So before I can really elaborate on this further, I want to tell you about an experience that I had. And this was, probably 12 years into my career. I was working in a memory care community, and we had a resident named John. And John was normally a pretty happy guy. He was gregarious. He would tease you. He would joke with the ladies and kind of flirt in not inappropriate ways, but he was just a people person. And he was normally fairly confused. He had pretty significant dementia. There was a reason that he lived in a memory care setting, and his memory was only good for a few seconds. So combine all that together and keep that in mind as I describe what happened on this particular day. I walked over to the east side of the building, which is where John lived, one morning. And I was just kind of doing rounds, checking on everybody, looking around, making sure that everyone was doing well. And it was just after breakfast. I noticed that all of our staff members were in rooms assisting residents to change their clothes or do oral care or otherwise get ready for the rest of the day. But John was not in his room. He was out in the common area, and he was standing in front of a sofa, just sort of blankly staring off into space. And I knew that virtually every day, John went to our morning exercise program. It was just routine for him. And so I thought, well, I'm going to be really helpful. I'm going to assist the staff. I'm going to help John. I'm just going to go up to him and help him get to the activity room so that he can do these exercises. Now, one other thing that you need to know about John is that if you did or said something that he didn't like, he'd first kind of look at you sideways, and then he'd glare at you, and then his right fist would start to clench. And if you kept pushing your luck and doing things that irritated him, pretty soon that fist would come toward your face, and it would not be pretty. So I knew that John could be a little bit agitated if something didn't go well. So I was really aware of things when I approached him, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but it had to have been all wrong because he gave me that sideways glance and his right hand started to clench, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to take one across the jaw if I keep pushing my luck. So I excused myself. And in that building, there was no end of the hall. There was just a continual walkway. And I knew it would take about 45 seconds to walk that, which was perfect because I knew that John's memory was good for about 15 seconds. And I thought, hey, this is great. I will walk the loop and I will reapproach, and I'll just use a different approach. I'll try again. I don't remember what I said to John when I reapproached, but I will never forget what he said, because he looked at me and he said, boy, am I glad you're here. I just talked to the biggest idiot. And that's me. you need to know that not only was I a big idiot to John that day, but I have been the biggest idiot to probably everybody that I've ever served. And I've been the biggest idiot to my wife many, many times in the last 22 years that we've been married. And I have 4 children. I've been the biggest idiot to them over and over and over. And I've been the biggest idiot to all kinds of friends and associates. And the only thing that makes me feel just a little bit better about my idiocy is the fact that all of you and everybody that we meet in one way or another has been the big idiot at some point. Human communication is just difficult. And so I want to share a few things that will help us do better in our interactions for people. But I share this story because I want to give you and all of us permission to make mistakes. We're going to talk about some things that are challenging. You might have some insight where you look back and say, oh, wow, I've been doing it all wrong. And if you have that experience, then just learn from it and move on. If you make a mistake and you move forward, that's called a great education. Now, if you keep making the same mistake over and over and over, and you stubbornly refuse to keep trying, well, that's kind of stupid, to be blunt. But most of us, I think, are willing to keep trying and to keep learning. So I just want to set the stage with that. And what I did with John really is it was a problem because I was task focused. And so to help you understand why it's so important not to be task focused and why it's so easy to fall into task focused ways of interacting, I want to give you an example that on the surface has nothing to do with being a care partner for somebody. This is a 2007 performance by violinist Joshua Bell. Now, if you don't know Joshua Bell, he's a world famous violinist, started playing professionally when he was just a child, really, early teens, I believe. And he's performed all over the world. He's played on movie soundtracks. He's an amazing, amazing performer. And the Washington Post magazine wanted to know what would happen if they put Joshua Bell in the middle of a very public area, but disguised. If he played as a street performer and kind of looked the part of a street performer, would anybody notice the difference? Would anybody recognize that the quality of the music was way above the average street performer? They had video footage of the experience. You can see it on YouTube, but I want to share with you part of that performance from 2007 in the DC Metro station. So here goes. Did you notice what was going on? Did you see how many people just passed by him without hardly a second glance? They just kept right on moving about their day. Now, if we were to slow down the tape, what you would see is that every child that went by actually looked and kind of tugged against his or her parent as if to say, hey, something amazing is happening here. Let's go check it out. But people just kept on moving. Why is that? Well, let's consider a few facts about Joshua Bell's performance. First of all, he was playing a Stradivarius violin that he paid about $3.5 million for. It's worth a lot more than that now, but you couldn't argue with the quality of the instrument. One of the greatest violins ever created by one of the greatest violin makers, if not the greatest violin maker in history. So, amazing instrument. And normally Joshua Bell earns $1,000 a minute for his performances. So we probably all should have kept practicing if we wanted to make it big. He played for 45 minutes, and yet only 7 people out of 1,097 stopped. And one of those 7 was a super fan. She kind of recognized him under the hat, thought, whoa, free Joshua Bell concert. This is awesome. So you could say that 6 out of over 1,000 stopped because of what he was doing there, which is no better than the average street performer. And for a guy that earns $1,000 a minute, earning a whopping $32.17 from 27 passing travelers who threw a little money in his case in that 45-minute period was terrible. And when Joshua Bell was interviewed about the experience, he said it was the hardest performance of his life, because for the first time ever, he actually questioned whether he was any good. He wondered if he had just been fooling himself all these years, because all of a sudden, nobody was paying attention to his music. And he thought, gosh, if I was good, people would notice, people would recognize, hey, this isn't your average street performer. What is it that his performance teaches us? Why is it that people just kept walking right on by? Well, one of the things that we learn from his performance is that context matters. Joshua Bell was taken out of context. Humans use context clues to make sense of the world. Our brains are very good at taking real thin slices of things and just quickly making a judgment about where we are and what's going on. Visually, we think, for example, that we see our entire visual field, all 180-ish degrees, depending on how good our eyes are. But in reality, we actually see a small portion of that, and our brains just fill in the rest of it. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. But we are more myopic as human beings than we really understand. And we use context clues to make sense of the world. Think, for example, of how you interpret the context. If you're walking down a street, last week I was speaking to the Tennessee Healthcare Association. And so I was in Nashville, and I was headed to a rental car place, and I was actually walking there, and it was in the middle of the day, but I decided to take a shortcut, and I kind of went down this alley, and there were these 3 guys that did not look all that good. They were tatted up from head to toe, no shirts on, grungy looking shorts, and they kind of started walking toward me. And I will admit, I felt kind of nervous in that moment, because the context was, I'm out of the line of sight of most people. I probably should not have tried to take this shortcut in a city that I'm not all that familiar with. And these guys could be kind of scary. Now, in reality, they walked right by me, and there was no issue. Conversely, it could have been one guy dressed in a nice business suit, and he could have held me up at gunpoint. But my brain probably would not have felt the same level of fear seeing someone dressed differently in that context, because I would have used the clues in a different way. Now, that may sound like, oh, we're all just so judgmental. And in a way, yeah, we are. We have to make judgment calls, and our brains do that based on context. When we see something or someone taken out of context, it confuses us, and we make all kinds of mistakes. And that's important to keep in mind when we're trying to understand our topic today. So I want to give you an example of how we could apply this idea from the Joshua Bell experience to a caregiving type of situation. Let's suppose that we have someone moving into an assisted living community, and the family comes in to set up the room, and they lay out pictures of this resident. And this is one of the pictures that they set up. We might look at that picture and think, well, he looks like a nice man. Doesn't look like he's spent his whole life living under a bridge. He looks like he's probably gone places and done some things. Maybe he likes hats. He seems to have kind eyes. He seems like a friendly person. And the family might put out a picture of him when he was younger, and we might think, wow, he's actually aged pretty well. He's a pretty handsome guy. And if we're working in a long-term care setting, one of the first things that staff members would start talking about is, well, when's he going on the shower schedule? Is he like a Tuesday, Saturday? Is he going to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday? How about his meals? Does he have a regular diet, or is he low concentrated sweets? Do we need to assist him in the bathroom, or is he independent in that? Does he have behaviors? You didn't bring another behavioral resident in here, did you? And we start thinking about all the things that we have to do for people. The reason why is that nobody wakes up and looks in the mirror and says, I hope that today is the day that I get to move to Shady Acres Retirement or the Summit or wherever. Nobody wants to leave their home. We all understand that if someone moves to some kind of a long-term care setting, it's because they need help. And in general, they need help with activities of daily living, bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, ambulation, and so forth. And so when someone comes, it's natural for staff and family members alike to be thinking about, what are we going to do to take care of this person? This person has needs, and how are we going to fulfill those needs? Well, if this was our resident and he was moving into a place like the Summit, we would put together a little care plan, and staff might go in the room and they would treat this man with all the dignity and respect and love that they could muster. They would be kind to him. They would try to accomplish everything on his care plan. And he would feel terrible about it. In fact, he would feel just like Joshua Bell in the subway that day. Joshua Bell felt bad, not because anybody treated him poorly. If you watch the whole tape, nobody threw tomatoes at him. Nobody yelled at him. Nobody told him to knock that racket off. People treated him just fine. They treated him like any other street performer. And that's the point. They did not treat him like Joshua Bell. They just treated him like anybody else in that situation. The reason that this particular man would feel badly if we went in and we fulfilled his care plan and we did everything on his care plan and we did it with dignity and respect is that in subtle ways we would treat him differently than he's used to being treated. Most of the time when his picture was taken, this is what he looked like. All three pictures are of the same man, Sir Charles Spencer Chaplin, aka Charlie Chaplin. And if we didn't know that we were taking care of a Hollywood legend, it's not that we would treat him badly. We would actually treat him really well. We would do all kinds of positive things for him. We just wouldn't treat him like he's used to being treated. Years ago, I heard from an acquaintance who had gotten on a plane in first class and sat down next to a guy that leaned over to him and said, "Hi, I'm Mick Jagger." And this acquaintance said, "Hey, pleased to meet you," because he doesn't know rock and roll at all. He's not a fan. He was an older gentleman that I didn't even know who the Rolling Stones were. And Mick Jagger was a little bit flustered. And he said, "No, I'm Mick Jagger." And this acquaintance said, I heard you. How's your day going, Mick? It's good to meet you. And Mick Jagger was just so flustered. And he reached into the seat back pocket and he pulled out a copy of the Rolling Stones magazine with himself on the cover. And he pointed to his picture and he said, "No, I'm Mick Jagger. That's me." We all have ways that we see ourselves. We have an identity. We have a way that we're used to being treated. And unfortunately, when we start to decline physically and cognitively, and we start needing assistance from other people, we're often taken out of context. And people begin treating us in ways inconsistent with how we see ourselves, in ways that don't match our identity. And it becomes very easy to go straight to the task instead of connecting with the person. So we fall into a trap that I call the task trap, which is really an acronym. It means we get too busy being routine focused, avoiding additional responsibility. And by that, I mean interpersonal responsibility. We have a responsibility to connect with people in a way that really fits how they see themselves and is meaningful to them. Abraham Lincoln once said, "Tact is the ability to describe others as they see themselves." So in order to really connect with someone, we have to understand how they're used to being treated and how they see themselves, even in that moment. So we get too busy we're just caught up in the routine. We're trying to check stuff off the list. We avoid all that interpersonal responsibility, and we start putting tasks ahead of people. We begin defining our success as whether or not we complete the task. So, for example, in healthcare, we have deluded ourselves for years into thinking that if we keep people clean and dry in seasonally appropriate clothing, and we give them 3 square meals, and we give them their pills on time, that we've done something incredible. And if you think about it, that's ridiculous. If all that you and I had to look forward to were meals and some clean clothing and 2 or 3 showers a week and getting our pills on time and maybe sitting down to a rousing game of bingo once or twice a week and some TV mixed in, that would be like the worst week ever for me, and probably for you. That's like bare minimum stuff. That's like what might happen, minus the bingo, because forgive me, I'm not a fan of bingo, even though I was program director for several years. But minus all of that, that's like I'm sick. I can hardly do anything. If we were to write a care plan for each one of us, it would probably look very similar, because presumably all of us in this session today are independent in bathing, independent in dressing, independent in using the bathroom, independent in feeding ourselves, independent in walking around. We take care of ourselves right now. And so a care plan would really look very similar for all of us. Care plans largely focus on those activities of daily living. And yet, you and I are all very different people. That means that the care plan doesn't get to who we are. It just gets to all those things that have to be done before we can go about being who we are. You and I, we get up in the morning, we get ready for the day, we do whatever tasks we need to perform so that we feel ready to walk out the door and go be the people that we see ourselves as, and to show up in the different contexts that we have arranged to be in for that day. Who we are is largely what happens after our activities of daily living are completed. So if we define our success in serving others as completing those activities of daily living kinds of tasks, then we're in serious trouble, because we're starting to treat the other individual as an object, not as a person. Well, if you kick an object, it'll go in whatever direction you kick it. If you kick a person, they will kick you back. If you treat someone as an object, there's only really 3 possibilities for how to interact with them. You either treat them as an obstacle in your path, preventing you from something that you want. You treat them as a vehicle that you use to get something that you want, or they're simply irrelevant. So, for example, if I'm a family member and I've got some work to do, let's say I'm still working full-time and I've got a parent living at home with me and I'm trying to take care of that parent, or maybe it's a spouse, I'm trying to take care of the spouse, and maybe I don't even work full-time outside the house, but there's a lot of work to do to keep the household going. If I have things that I need to be doing, and this person that I'm serving has needs that are unmet, and they're clamoring for my attention, and they're needing help, it becomes very easy to start treating that person as an obstacle between me and what I really want to be doing. And as soon as we start treating the other person as an object, we find ourselves in trouble. If we treat people as people, then we recognize everyone has their own perspective, they have their own goals, their own needs, their own desires, their own habits, their own health challenges. We're all unique, and we need to be treated that way. And we get further when we treat others in ways that are consistent with how they see themselves. Unfortunately, there are a whole lot of institutional norms that increase susceptibility to the task trap. These are things like care plans and admission procedures and job descriptions and rules and policies and regulations. If you think about it, in a long-term care setting, for example, let's say assisted living, we are regulated based on how well we follow things like care plans. So I want to share an experience that I had a number of years ago to illustrate how easy it is to think that we're achieving the end goal based on a care plan, and yet we're not. We're treating someone as an object. This will explain why I think that care plans are one of the best tools that we have for dehumanizing a person. And I think care plans are super important. If you're a long-term care professional watching this, I am not advocating for getting rid of care plans. I think we need them. There's got to be some sort of an orderly way that we assist people with what they need. I just think we have to keep the care plan in its proper context and understand its limitations. Who we are is largely what happens after the care plan is completed. And it has a lot to do as well with how we interact with people while we're assisting them with their activities of daily living. So here's the story. Years ago, I was contacted by a geriatric psychiatrist here in the Boise, Idaho area where I live. And this doctor said, I have a patient in a skilled nursing facility who screams all the time. And it's driving the staff crazy. It's affecting other residents. It's a terribly frustrating situation. And they want me to medicate her. And this is not the kind of thing that you would medicate for. This is more likely an interpersonal issue. And he said, Eric, I want to hire you as a subcontractor. I need you to go in and figure out what's driving the screaming so that you can assist the staff to do things a little bit differently and provide some training for them, because I don't want to medicate this lady. And I said, great, be glad to do it. So on the day that I was there to observe this woman, she was sitting in a common area. And I sat down across the table from her and started interacting. But I was also aware of everything else going on in the room, partly because I wanted to know if there were other things that were influencing her, causing her to scream. I noticed after about 15 minutes that a male nurse wheeled a woman in who was sitting in a wheelchair. And from the way that she was drooping to the side and her face was drooping, it was obvious that she had had a stroke at some point in her life. And he wheeled her in, and Gunsmoke was on the television. And he wheeled her up, kind of facing the TV. And then he let go of her wheelchair, and he just turned and he walked away. And almost immediately, she started nervously bouncing up and down in that wheelchair and looking over her shoulder. And it's almost like she was wondering, how did I get here? How did my chair move? What happened? Where am I? And she started to moan and she got agitated. Now, interestingly, the woman that I was there to serve on behalf of this geriatric psychiatrist didn't scream the whole time. And I ended up determining that she was just lonely. She just needed attention. And when we fulfilled that need, she functioned a lot better. But this other lady was sitting there in a state of distress. And I think it was caused by the fact that she was treated as an object, not a person. Imagine that her care plan said, I love Gunsmoke. It's my favorite show. Please make sure that I get to the activity room to watch Gunsmoke every day. So that male nurse could have read a care plan like that and thought, okay, we've got to get her in for Gunsmoke. And he might have taken her in and thought, hey, we're doing a good job. We're taking care of this lady. This is person-centered care. And we're ensuring that she gets to do the things that she loves. But in reality, he didn't treat her as a person at all. He didn't treat her any differently than if she had been a mannequin sitting in that wheelchair and he just wheeled her in and walked off. She had no idea how she even got there. It would have only taken a few seconds for him to walk around and get down below her eye level so that he wasn't in a position of dominance interpersonally, could have gotten below eye level and smiled at her and called her by name and said something like, hi, Mary, it's time for Gunsmoke. I wanted to make sure you were here to watch it. Are you close enough to the TV? Are you warm enough? I have a blanket here if you're cold. Would you like something to drink? There are a lot of ways that he could have handled that, but by coming around and actually interacting with her, it would have really changed the dynamic. He would have been treating her as a person and recognizing her personhood instead of just wheeling her in as an object. And yet, if you think about how the state would regulate something like that, a lot of surveyors would look at a care plan and say, Oh, she's supposed to get in for Gunsmoke. Did that happen? Oh, yep, he wheeled her in. She's watching Gunsmoke. Check. 5 stars. Somehow we think that if we check everything off the list, that we've done something amazing. And maybe we have, but maybe we've just checked a bunch of stuff off the list and we haven't treated people as people. So I often teach people what I call the vital 5 pillars. And hearing about all 5 of those is another presentation for another day. But the first of those vital 5 pillars that I tell people about is to terminate the task trap. That is the biggest problem in healthcare. If you're working in a hospital, for example, and you don't know who that is in room 3, and you just walk in and you go about the tasks of changing the IV and cleaning up the bed sheets and assisting the person to the bathroom, and you don't know how that person is used to being treated and how he or she sees themselves, you're in trouble. And it's not that you treat people poorly, you just don't treat them the way that they're used to being treated. So step 1, especially when someone is living with dementia, is to connect with the person in a meaningful way. So consider, for example, your 2 homes. Whether you know it or not, you've got 2 homes. You have the home that you live in that maybe you own outright, or maybe you have a mortgage payment on, or maybe you're paying rent, but you live in a home. And then you have a home that you take with you everywhere, your bubble, your personal and intimate space. I want you to imagine what it would be like if you were sitting at home tonight, minding your own business, and let's say you're there by yourself, and you suddenly hear a knock at the door, and you go to the door and you see a total stranger. Maybe it's me, because most of you I've probably never met before. What if I showed up at your door as a total stranger, and you said, "Hey, may I help you?" What if I said, "Yeah, I just wanted to get a look inside," and I just walked right past you into your house, and I started going through things? Can you imagine how violated you would feel, how frightened you would feel, how intruded upon you would feel? It would be devastating, terrible. And yet, we often do that to people when it comes to their other home. You see, there are various distances that we can interact at. There's a public space, which is like you're on one side of the mall hallway and the other person's on the other side of the hallway. You pass like ships in the night. You don't even have to interact. And then there's a social distance. Social distance is that point at which if 2 people are walking down a hall toward each other and they're trying to be nice human beings and they're conscious of their thoughts, it's that point where your brain is thinking, not yet, not yet, not yet. Hi, how you doing? It's where you acknowledge the other person. And it's like 6 to 8 feet apart, which is why during the COVID pandemic, we talk all about social distancing. It's actually a term from the communication field and the study of proxemics. Well, we've talked about public distance, then there's a social distance, but you would never talk to a good friend for 2 hours at a social distance. You'd actually move closer. You'd move to what we call a personal distance. And you need permission to be in personal space. If you're walking down the street or you're in a building or something and you come face to face with someone and you're at a personal distance and you're kind of popping each other's bubble, boy, if you have no intention of interacting, it's awkward. That's when we do the little back and forth dance and the who's going to move to the right, who's going to move to the left so we can get past each other. It doesn't feel right. Can you imagine how uncomfortable it would feel if someone just stayed there in your personal space and had no permission to be there? If you didn't even know who they were? Imagine how much more violating it would feel, even if you knew the person, if they just got right up into your face. When we get closer than 1.4 feet, we're in intimate space. And we need permission to be in personal and intimate space. So instead of going right to the task, step 1 in every single interaction is to make a meaningful connection with the person, which usually means we're either a new friend or we're a long lost friend, especially when we're serving people living with dementia. And I realize maybe not all of you are. And this also impacts every aspect of our lives, even when we're around just everyday people. It could be someone at the grocery store. Step 1 in every interaction is to have some sort of a meaningful connection. And it can happen in seconds, but we've got to establish some level of trust. So let me give you an example to illustrate how all this works. Years ago, I took care of a lady named Susan. And I spent 5 or 6 years working with Susan. And every day between 3 and 5 o'clock, Susan would get really agitated. And she would start saying, "Where is Steve? Steve's got to be here. He needs to come and pick me up. I can't stay here. Where's Lubkin Street? How do I get to Lubkin Street? I have to go. Where is Steve? Has anyone seen Steve?" Now, Steve, her husband, died over 30 years ago. And one of her daughters tried to remind her of that. And she said, "Mom, I know this is hard," and tried to be as gentle as she could in explaining it. And she got to the end of that long explanation, and Susan looked at her and said, "I don't know what kind of a game you're playing. Your father's fine. I just saw him this morning. Why isn't he here?" Now, I came to know, and our staff came to know from interacting with Susan, that she thought she was in a hotel. And if you think you're in a hotel and your husband's supposed to come and pick you up and you're supposed to go home, that's kind of a problem. How do you deal with something like that? Well, there are 3 things that we consistently did that were very helpful. The first one is to terminate the task trap. We have to make a meaningful connection with Susan first. If she doesn't trust us, if she doesn't even know who we are, if there's not a relationship, she's less likely to go with anything. So how did we make a meaningful connection with her? Well, we'd play the role of the long lost friend. I'd walk up and say something like, "Susan, fancy meeting you here. I remember the first time I met you. Your daughter Pam invited me over to the house. Isn't it on Lubkin Street?" Now, Lubkin Street is not the home that she moved into the facility from. It was a home she lived in much earlier in life. You see, many people living with dementia tend to live in the past. They lose long-term memory progressively. They live further and further in the past. They tend to remember best things that they experienced between ages 15 and 30. So the house on Lubkin Street was where she lived as a teenager. But I would leverage that because she repeated it all the time. It was something that she did remember. And she repeated family members' names all the time. So by giving 2 bits of information that she did remember, I was giving social proof that I knew who she was. And 9.9 times out of 10, she'd say, "Oh, that's right, you know Pam." And then she'd launch into, "Well, have you seen Steve? He's supposed to be here. He needs to pick me up." That's when I would pull out what I call an emotional hook. And this is part of connecting with someone. If a person is lost, distressed, worried, concerned, afraid, one of the most important things that we can do is find a way to hook their emotional burden and pull it to us and carry it for them. And especially for people living with dementia, one of the best ways that we can carry another person's emotional burden is to blame ourselves. So she'd say, "Have you seen Steve? He's supposed to be here." And my response was, "Oh, I am so sorry. I forgot to tell you." And she would almost immediately start to calm down. It's as if you could hear her thoughts and she was thinking, "I'm so confused. I have no idea what's going on. Steve's supposed to be here, but maybe it's your fault." And that's a lot easier to take than thinking that we did something wrong. So she would start to calm down. The last step in the process was to say what was true in her world. Now, here's a lady living with advanced dementia, and she thinks her husband is still alive. It doesn't work to try to tell her that he's deceased. That makes no sense to her. So what is actually true in her world? Well, at the point in time that she's living, Steve was a traveling salesman. He covered Oregon, Washington, and Idaho, and it was totally common that he would call home and say he was going to be an extra day. So I would use that emotional hook. "Oh, I forgot to tell you." "What is it?" "Steve called." "He did?" "Yeah, he's been tied up on his sales route in Eugene, Oregon. The customer there needs something, and he said he has to stay an extra day. He asked if you could spend one more night here. I told him it would be fine." Almost always, Susan would say something like, "Oh, I'm so glad I found you. I had no idea what was going on. Are you sure I can stay?" Now, notice I was not trying to convince her that she lived there and had been there for years. I wasn't trying to pull her into reality. I was not trying to prove that this is going to be her home for the rest of her life. She just needed a reason to stay a little bit longer. A hotel is a perfectly safe place to be if you have a reason to be there. But if you think your husband's supposed to pick you up and you need to be at home, that's kind of distressing. So I gave her a reason that made sense to her and connected with her in her world. That's what not falling into the task trap can look like, especially for people with dementia. Now, this is Art. Art owned a meatpacking business earlier in his life, and all day long, Art would go from station to station, working alongside his employees, supporting them, offering an encouraging word. And on the weekends, Art would coach his kids' Little League teams. He'd go to church. He'd be there to do honeydews for his wife around the house. He was just a good guy. And when he developed Alzheimer's disease, Art, if he was not otherwise occupied, would go room to room in the memory care community where I was working. He'd take his little red walker and his little black basket, and he'd go into a room and he'd see something that wasn't his. And he would pick it up and he'd put it in his basket and he'd walk out the room. And at first, well-meaning staff members would walk up to Art and say, "Oh, Art, I know you didn't mean to, but this belongs to Eric. We need to give it back." And he'd say, "You can't have that. Get away from me. Stop that." Because he didn't remember how that thing got in his walker basket. He just knew that it was either his or he was doing something good. And by saying, "I know you didn't mean to, but this belongs to Eric," no matter how sweetly you say it, what you're implying is you're a thief and you stole. Well, that's no good. That does not connect with Art based on how he sees himself. It's also falling into the task trap. If getting this back to the right room is the task, if you walk up and you go straight to that task, you've completely missed the most important first step, which is to make a connection with Art. So I'd walk up to him and say things like, "Well, Art, fancy meeting you here. How's the meatpacking business? How's Elaine?" That was his wife. We talked for 30 to 60 seconds. And once he was laughing a little bit, I knew we were home free. Victor Borga once said, "Laughter is the closest distance between two people." So if you can get someone laughing, it's usually a sign that there's genuine trust and connection. So he'd start chuckling a little bit. And then I would look in his walker basket and I would do something that matched his identity. I would pick up the object and I'd say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I have been looking everywhere for this. You found it. What would I do without you?" I know right where it goes. And we would walk to his room, pats on the back the whole way. "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. I'm so glad that you found this." And he would stand a little taller, and that fit his identity. He never fought that because it was consistent with how he saw himself. And it was not going straight to the task. It was connecting with Art as a person and treating him as a person, not just an obstacle in the way of good resident relations and keeping things where they're supposed to be. Well, I hope you're recognizing the value of connecting with people as people and not going straight to the task. The kinds of things that we're talking about are complex. And so if you're not already signed up for it, I want to give you an opportunity to get a whole bunch more training and insight. Here at Mind for All Seasons, we created a service called the Caregiver Minute, and it's a free daily video, 3 to 7 minutes, about the very kinds of things that we've been talking about today to help both family and professional caregivers really refine their skills and be inspired and be prepared to step out and serve people with greater purpose and greater understanding of the things that they're facing. It's completely free. You put in your first name and your email address by going to mindforallseasons.com/caregiver minute. And then you just get an email every Monday through Friday in your inbox. So I would invite you, if you're not already signed up for that, to sign up for the Caregiver Minute. Well, we've reached the end of some of the information that I wanted to share with you about not falling into the task trap. But I'd love to answer any questions that you have, or kind of hear your observations and your thoughts or your experiences about this. So I want to open it up. I'm going to ask Lori to kind of moderate for us. It's a little bit trickier for me sometimes to see what's in the chat. So I'm going to pull it up here and see if I can spot anything. But if you're online with us, go ahead and type something into the chat. And if you're there in person, then I'll let Lori kind of steer the ship on those questions.
Thank you, Eric. Eric, can you see me? Hear me?
I can see you. Yep.
Okay. Thank you so much for that presentation. That was very interesting. I've done a number of different programs with Eric and the team at A Mind for All Seasons, and I'll tell you, I learned something every single time I get a chance to just work with them. So that was a new one for me. I appreciate it. I'll tell you, I saw one of the best examples of the person-centered care with one of our caregivers, Heather, over in memory care the other day, where I was at the end of the hall and I saw her at eye level, down, crouched down, talking to a resident as she was sitting in the chair. And I could see this engagement from a distance, and Heather's talking to her. And then Heather reaches over and gives this woman a hug. This was just compassion that was driven from coming to engaging one-on-one with that resident. And it was so nice to see just the reality of not trying to get whatever she needed to get done, or the myriad of things that, that Heather maybe had on her plate, but to really see that engagement and being able to keep person-centered care top of mind is something, that we have to just keep in mind. So I will see if there's any questions that come up in the chat box. Eric, you either have to see it, because I'm not sure if it's going to pop up on my screen here. But
yeah, I've got it open.
You what?
I've got it open. I'm not seeing anything right now, but well, sometimes it takes people a minute to think and process and wonder, hey, do I have a question? While people are doing that, I'll just share a thought, and that's that in every interaction in our lives, even when we're not talking about a caregiving type of situation, we can choose to approach things in a task-focused way or a person-centered way. So let's say that my job is checking groceries at the grocery store. I can either focus on the task, or I can focus on the fact that I'm there with people. I can decide that, hey, my job is checking groceries, and it's really boring. I just check groceries all day long. Or I can say, my job is to be with people. And while I'm with people, I check their groceries. Do you see the difference in the mindset there? Yeah. I think it's also important to recognize there's a difference in person-centered care versus preference-centered care. Sometimes people get hung up on writing care plans or giving instructions to others that are focused on preferences. Things like, let's say we write a care plan from the first person perspective, and it says, I prefer to shower in the morning, and I prefer to use Paul Mitchell shampoo and Dove soap. Well, that's great, and it's important information, and it helps us serve someone, but that's a preference. And we can use that information and really connect with the person, and the way that we are interacting with them can be very, very person-centered, or we can just delude ourselves into thinking, oh, if we make sure that we've got Paul Mitchell shampoo and Dove soap, that we're doing something amazing. Well, we're meeting a preference. There's a difference. On the Q&A, Aaron said, will this webinar be available as a video after?
Yes, we are recording it, so we'll go ahead and send it out to those that have attended, because I have your email addresses, and then we'll also send it out through our constant contact program for other family members that weren't able to sign up and attend. Do I have any other questions from?
I was raised by my parents, and I was always raised to tell the truth, and then like my dad passed away. Mom sometimes says that, your dad, I haven't heard from him and he passed away. And I just feel guilty, like telling her he's not here right now, you know, not giving her the truth.
Sure.
But I guess it's something I have to deal with myself, knowing that it's to help her, because she has dementia.
Right. I'll repeat the question just so Eric, you can hear it, and those on
I
the
heard
call.
it, but
Oh,
yeah.
okay. So how do you deal or make a suggestion, Eric, on the fine line between telling the truth and being able to help meeting where that person's at?
Yeah, it's a really good question, very important one, and one that comes up all the time. I would suggest that, first of all, truth is largely a matter of perception. And that sounds morally fuzzy, and I don't mean to be that way. But when I was in college, I worked for an insurance agency. And when one of our insureds would get in a car accident and we'd get eyewitness reports, sometimes we'd have 3 or 4 reports and they would all say something different. And we'd be left going, well, what's the truth here? Everyone would see things from a little bit different angle. And the truth was kind of somewhere in the middle. So I think it's important to keep in mind that there's a perceptual issue. When someone is living with dementia and they're living in the past, and literally to their brain, it feels like current reality is something from 60 years ago, then their truth becomes what was real back then. And what I'm suggesting in terms of interacting is that if we know what was true in that part of their world, then it's kind of like we've just traveled through time. And we're saying what actually would have happened back then and what was reality back then. Lying is just shooting from the hip, making something up. For example, with Susan, when she was looking for Steve, if I had said, oh, he's down at the bar having a few drinks with his buddies after work, he'll be here soon. That would have been terrible because Steve never drank. She would have looked at me like I was crazy and said, what kind of a game are you playing? Who are you talking about? Steve doesn't drink. And it would have been very distressing. So I think it's important to recognize it has to be their truth. It has to make sense in their world. And then from a moral standpoint, I think we have to look at where the moral high ground is. If I try to contradict a person who is literally missing the body parts that would allow them to remember, if we could see inside the brain, we'd see that the brain of someone with dementia is missing 50 to 70% of its mass. There are literally parts of that brain gone. Telling them, hey, try harder and remember that your spouse is deceased and this is reality, is cruel. It's as cruel as telling someone with a broken leg to take the cast off and just try harder because it's all in their head. So that's not a very moral thing to do. And if we cause the person great distress and they're agitated and it doesn't reach them, then all of a sudden, a lot of people are asking for some kind of medication to try to control that down. And those medications are all on a list called the Beers list of medications that should never be used in the elderly, especially those with dementia. So now we're going to put them on a drug that increases their fall risk, decreases their cognitive functioning, and makes it a whole lot worse. I don't think that that's the moral high ground. So I think we have to weigh all of those things out. But it's definitely tricky. Hopefully that's helpful, though.
Good call. Thank you, Eric. Yes, Yvonne.
I have a question. My mom ranges from, kind of mild dementia to worse, depending on the day, the time of day, whatever. So my question is, her identity is based on working as a nurse and teacher for years, then doing activities with my dad until they passed. So she never played games or did anything like that. So she hates all the activities that are offered here, and it's really hard to get her involved in them. Now, if I come and visit, we can color one-on-one, and she'll do that if I'm doing it with her. But to do stuff on her own, she's like, well, I never did that. All I did was read for entertainment, and now she can't read really. So she did never watch TV. How do you, respect her identity, deal with her reality, but at the same time know that getting her more involved will make her happier?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a couple of ways that I'd answer that. And if you couldn't hear online, the question was really, hey, what do I do with a mom who she didn't historically engage in the kinds of activities that are happening in the community right now. And so how do I reach her? What do I do? How do I respect her personhood and what she wants to do? And In order to do that, I think it's important first to look at the things that are meaningful to her. I've worked with a lot of retired nurses for whom a great meaningful way to engage them is to get some fake nursing charts and to ask them to help, or to have them kind of go around with some of the team members that are doing nursing type functions. That may be appropriate in her situation. So it's something to look at. I think it's also important to explore whether or not there are ways of actually boosting her functioning so that she can enjoy some of those things a little bit more. If she enjoyed reading, then we've worked with lots of people participating in the enhanced protocol who have gone literally from not being able to remember things long enough to read to improving enough that they can read again. I just talked to someone end of last week where that was the case. They were performing enough better that they were starting to read again. So that may be something to look at. Using team members to read and engage with her, or other residents who still can read. Maybe there are ways of brokering some relationships where another resident could read to her if that's enjoyable to her. So few possibilities there, and we could dig from that point.
Eric, let's actually take this segue to introduce Robeson, our memory coach here at the summit, and he can definitely help do the bridging and introductions to try to find some other engagement for your mom. So Robeson Flynn is the memory coach here at the summit at Sunland Springs. We have a unique program called the Enhanced Protocol here, where you have the ability to use some of our brain therapies to come through our roadmap and be able to see if we can identify some of the root causes of cognitive decline, and then see what we can do to supplement, improve that cognitive functioning. And it's the only one we have here in the state of Arizona. And so with that, I will be happy to introduce Robeson Flynn. I think I'm going to pass you the microphone.
That makes sense. Hi there, my name is Robeson. I have been running the Enhanced Protocol here in the community for the last 3 years. The task trap is crazily important to what I do. You know, we use a variety of therapy devices, things like exercise with oxygen therapy. And, you know, you really need to build a rapport with that person in order to get them on a bike with a mask on their face. You know, sometimes using, you know, some depleted oxygen, well, that's a little unpleasant for the person. So, you know, it can be, you know, tremendously beneficial to, you know, stop and really assess the person as a whole. You know, if they're upset about something, well, you know, they're upset because, you know, they looked in the mirror and their hair was white. Well, regardless of whether the emotion is, you know, grounded in reality or not, the chemicals are still flowing through the bloodstream. So those emotions are real, no matter whether they're, you know, based in reality or not. So understanding, you know, the need to engage a person on a, you know, on the individual level is crazy, very, very important.
We have a question on this.
Sure. Would you say the preference written care plans can be a tool for centered care? It can be hard for my team to write out care plans with person-centered wording for every single client.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's probably almost impossible to write out a care plan with person-centered wording, because person-centered care is more about how you interact with someone moment to moment, and you can't write out every single moment. So I think a good starting point with care plans is, number one, to write them from the first person perspective, and to really make sure that you've accurately acknowledged their preferences, but that you teach team members the limitations of a care plan. A care plan doesn't get you to person-centered care. It's a start in understanding what someone needs, but actually the most valuable tool that you can use to interact with someone in a person-centered way is their life history. That's the secret weapon. The reason that when your own grandmother with dementia who gets upset and starts yelling at you might be, you might handle that a little bit differently is you remember all the times that she made Winnie the Pooh pancakes for you, or, whatever it was that she sacrificed earlier in life. You have a different kind of relationship than someone that you don't know from Adam or Eve. So having a life history and knowing who a person is, what they've done, how they see themselves matters. Another quick example would be if you're walking in a room serving someone who was, let's say, a retired military general, and you're a 22-year-old young woman who comes in and presumes to tell the general that it's time to get up and time to have your pills and time to use the bathroom and time to shave, you're going to fail. But if you understand who that person is and what he's done in his life and how important it is for him to feel like it's his idea and that he's in charge, and you're using the kind of deferential language that you would use to a general, you're going to get a lot further. So I would focus more on the life history than on the care plan itself, and I'd make it required reading for everybody involved.
Absolutely. That's great advice, Eric. Knowing a little bit about your resident goes a long way, especially if, a resident comes up, as you stated before, where's my husband? Well, if they're from, a small town in, Minnesota, oh, he went off went to town to get some groceries. He'll be back in a couple of hours. It really makes a huge difference if you know the life history of your resident. I would like to thank all of you for coming to our webinar. As Lori said, it will be sent out to you